Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a very special guest on the show. We're joined by Margaret Heffernan, writer, entrepreneur, TED speaker, and former CEO of 5 businesses. Margaret speaks and blogs about business leadership, management, innovation, and creativity. On today's show, we'll be discussing her new book, Uncharted: How to Map the Future Together. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I'm happier now I'm here with you as well. Before we jump in, kind of tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, because you have such a fascinating background and journey to where we are now before we get into the details of the show.
Sure. Well, I mean, it is, I don't know that it's that fascinating, but I think there's a big argument in my book, as you know, that about how really careers are made by experimenting, trying stuff and seeing how you like it. And that's certainly been true for me. So I started my working life at the BBC as a very humble dictation typist. Why I did that after graduating from Cambridge with a very good degree, I don't know, but I did. Really, I was working as a temp because I didn't know if I wanted to go back to academia. And I thought, well, if you leave it, you can find out if you miss it. Obviously, I didn't miss it that much. But anyway, I started there and it was a great time at the BBC. It was expanding. There were lots of new opportunities. I probably got promoted about twice a year. And I ended up as first of all, a radio drama and documentaries producer, and then a television drama and documentaries producer. So I was there for 13 fantastic years. I think some of the, richest, most exciting time I've ever had. And I just got to the point of, looking at the people around the table with me who were all much older and much maler than I, and thought, well, I don't think I want to do this forever. And so I left and I ran the Trade Association for Independent Film and Television Producers, which was also a great experience. And then my husband got a position at Harvard doing medical research. So we moved to the US. The media market in Boston is pretty boring, to say the least. And I'd always been really interested in tech because, I'd had computers early, and I'm a little bit of a nerd, not a huge nerd, but anyway. And I ended up working for tech companies and then working for a venture capitalist firm that wanted, as they say, grown-up supervision. So I ended up running companies based on their investments. And honestly, it was some of the most fun I have ever had at work. Exhausting, challenging, terrifying, thrilling. Got completely and utterly burned out. And 9 years later, we moved back to the UK. And I thought, right, the next business I have has to be one with no employees, because I have now hired and fired and managed so many amazing people. I think I needed a bit of a break. And a friend of mine suggested that I wrote well and I should think about writing, and suggested I write about the internet because I'd been, in it on the front row of so many incredible breakthroughs. And I just thought, well, it's either too early or too late for a book like that. I think now it was way too early. But I wanted to write a book about, what women's careers were looking like, because I was the only female CEO tech that I knew. So I wrote that book, and I discovered I loved writing. And so now I've written 6 books. And in the meantime, have also, as you said in your introduction, I mentor chief executives and senior executives in big firms. I mentor a couple of entrepreneurs in very tiny firms. And I teach at the School of Management at the University of Bath, which have been nice enough to call me a professor, because I love staying in touch with young people and how they're thinking and seeing. So it's quite a mixed bag, and it's obviously a very mixed narrative. But it's just driven by curiosity, not liking to stay still, not, being afraid of getting stale, I think, repeating myself. And so, also my husband and I have always had this attitude that you live off what you earn. And sometimes I've earned a lot and sometimes I've earned absolute peanuts. And if you take that approach, then you have a lot of freedom.
Well, it sounds like you haven't slowed down one bit.
No, hardly. I always dream of doing it. And then after about, 3 days, I think, God, what's going on?
My wife says that to me all the time. She's like, I don't think you could ever retire, Chris, because you just drive yourself crazy, and probably her crazy and my daughter crazy, because I like being in that chaos and disruption. And like you said, that's where the magic happens. Doesn't feel like it at the time. At the time.
Also, I mean, also, I think, I've been really lucky for the most part, always to do work I love. And if you're doing work you love, well, why would you want to stop?
I always have to explain myself to her family when they say that I'm working so hard, I take a break. And I'm like, you don't get it. I enjoy this. Like for you curling up and watching Netflix and relaxing is your idea of fun. My idea of fun is doing what I do. You call that work. I call that fun. So
exactly.
It's quite hard to explain to people.
I mean, I'm not averse to a bit of Netflix, and I do and I do take 2 months off in the summer, but I work as hard as I do for no other reason than I just love what I do. And I love a lot of the people I've been lucky enough to work with. And I like seeing them flourish, and I learn a lot from them. And, it's just, I think I'm very lucky.
Yeah, amazing. Well, tell us about this most recent book. What was the inspiration behind it? And, of course, given the last 9 months, pretty timely as well.
Yeah. So the book really was kind of kicked off by a couple of observations. One was lots of people kept asking me questions about the future, like what's going to happen about the Brexit referendum, what's going to happen in the first Trump election. And I kept thinking, why are people asking me? Why would I know? Nobody knows. The way I parsed the question, it seemed to me that the way people thought about the future was that it was something hidden behind a door to which special people had a key. And I thought, well, that's all wrong. That's very magical thinking. And, we don't know the future. And the sooner we kind of get over the thought that somebody does, the freer we are to start exploring and making what we want it to be. So that was one thing. Another was a sort of nerdy data point I stumbled over, which was that experts who study forecasting were arguing that really about the furthest out you can see for really accurate forecasts is if you're very rigorous, very open-minded, consult a very wide range of sources, endlessly adjust and refine your forecast and assign probabilities to them. The furthest out you can see is about 400 days. And if you're not as rigorous as that, and most of us aren't, then it's probably 150 days. And that was one of those things, it just stuck in my head, because I thought there isn't a single company I work with or have ever worked with that worked on that basis.
Yeah, I've got it written in my notes as well. I was like, I don't know one company that ever worked on that basis either.
And I thought, well, if that's true, then everything we're doing has to change. It's completely out of sync with the real world. And so, the first third of the book is, why is this true? And why are all the different ways we have for thinking about the future kind of doomed to let us down in one way or another? And then if you buy this argument, then what the heck do we do about it? And of course, that's the much more positive part of the book, which is all the other ways we have for thinking about the future, which are infinitely more creative and liberating than depending on pundits or magical thinking.
One of the things that struck me is we always use the term that history repeats itself, and you argue against that. Is that right?
Yeah, and it doesn't repeat itself for a number of reasons. The main reason is history is very driven by new knowledge. So the decisions we are making today aren't the same as decisions that people in similar situations made in the past, because we know lots of things that they didn't know, including the decisions that they made. So if you study, as everybody quickly tried to do, if you studied how people responded to the 1918 pandemic, it's not actually very useful. Pandemics are always with us. You can always find repeats. But we know much more now, and who we are is different, and how we respond is different, and our democracies and political systems, and not to mention scientific capability, is different. So this pandemic, what's most interesting about it is not how it's similar to 1918, which is pretty paper thin, but how it's different. And our belief that history repeats itself, which comes from Marx, suggests that we're just kind of helpless flotsam in this great wave of history, which of course is in itself a fundamentally authoritarian perspective. But it also suggests there's nothing we can do about it. That is obviously deeply disempowering and unhelpful.
No, I agree with you on that, because whenever I hear that, it does feel very, disempowering. You're kind of helpless. And I took an opposite stance when COVID hit. Our business was massively disrupted, and we had 80% of our revenue disappeared. And if I would have kind of worked on the premise of what happened in the past, I probably wouldn't be here right now. So let me take charge of my own our own direction, as opposed to looking at what's happened in the past and control our own.
And I also think, people often, it's not so much they think it repeats itself, but they draw analogies. And, often they draw very self-serving analogies. And these give them a degree of confidence and certainty that is really dangerous. So, for example, both Presidents Eisenhower and Johnson kept drawing analogies in the Vietnam War between Vietnam and Hitler and Munich. And that made them feel, A, that they were destined to win, oops, and B, that they really knew where they were. But actually what it stopped them doing was deeply understanding the Vietnamese culture and mindset and the Vietnamese historical relationship with China. And so it led to disaster. Similarly, when the so-called Arab Spring broke out, everybody started comparing it to their own kind of narratives of liberation, which meant that they've utterly failed to see that actually each incident was not the same as the one before. Tunisia was not Egypt, which was not Lebanon, which was, not Libya, which was not Syria, but they all kind of surged in with this metaphor, which in the end not only didn't help them, I think it led them horribly astray.
Why are we so addicted to prediction and desperate for self-certainty?
Well, I think partly it does give us a level of confidence, which, however spurious, we really like. I think often also they are sold to us with great avidity.
That's true.
So, Silicon Valley, which very quietly has become really the powerhouse of propaganda, will constantly tell us, for example, this is the summer that virtual reality will really come into its own. Every year of my life, it's been the summer that virtual reality was going to come. Right? Yeah. I can't remember when it wasn't that summer. This is not forecasting. This is salesmanship. Or take something like driverless cars, right? Sergey Brin says, driverless cars is going to be with us in 2017. Oops, I mean 2018. Oops, I mean 2019. What this is essentially a way of browbeating legislators to ensure that the law gets amended in case driverless cars ever become possible. They don't face any regulatory scrutiny. So this is not a prediction. This is propaganda. So there's huge, people see huge possibility in trying to convince the public that a certain future is inevitable. And therefore, there is no point, you or me or governments or democracies, questioning it. We should just really, lie down, play dead, and let the kind of tank that is Silicon Valley run over us.
Oh, and I'm assuming before Silicon Valley came along, it is just still happening throughout history, right?
Well, absolutely. And, the minute you say, well, it's inevitable that, what you're really saying is, this is what I want, and could you please not get in my way? And so there's a lot of money and power that speaks through the language of prediction. And there's also a lot of professional advantage, and in my book, I talk about this, I think, rather infamous report that I think it came out in 2015, but I may be wrong on the date, which said that, by 2035, 47% of jobs will have been eliminated due to automation. And this was just seized, instantly with no question, no critical thinking at all. Like, this is it. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And if anybody had taken the not very great trouble to read this original paper, they would have seen that in the very first paragraph, the authors talk about a new, previously untested model for this kind of prediction, which means it might be true, it might not be true. But the drama of the headline is really important to academics because it's how they get citations, how they get, the number of citations and publications that they get is part of their promotion track. It's very good for the university that hosts them to be cited constantly, time and time and time again. And so this is how the individuals and the institutions advance their professional profiles and careers. There is a lot of value if you can create a lot of drama around prediction. And this is what led John Maynard Keynes in the 1920s to become deeply uncomfortable with forecasting as a business, because he said, the more certainty you can offer, the more drama there is. And the more drama there is, the greater the conflict of interest between truth and forecasting.
I don't want to get too political, but do you think this is, I feel like this is already taking place right now with the vaccine? It kind of seems to be.
Absolutely. And we've seen this, and I feel very uncomfortable about this, that you have seen a number of scientists been kind of dragooned into doing the PR marketing around vaccines, which I know, some of them are very uncomfortable with, because of course there is a big commercial competition going on, quite, beside all the humanitarian urgency around it. So, this prediction about who's going to win seems to me a pretty ugly sideshow.
Yeah, no, I feel like I'm seeing it kind of unfold in front of
it's
my
not
eyes.
comfortable, is it?
No. You got you got Fauci over in the US saying, the UK hasn't done enough research and they fast tracked it without, going through necessary precautions and safety measures. You got other countries saying other things. It seems like a bit of a mess. Right now, as well. So I'm not sure how I feel about it. So, if we can't predict the future, then how can we at least prepare for it? Because no one saw, this coming, or maybe there were some people, but most of us didn't see this coming, as well. So if we can't predict it, how can we prepare for it, at least as organizations? Obviously, our listeners and our guests, our HR executives, how can we start at least preparing?
Well, I think there are a whole bunch of things. I write at length in my book about experiments, trying new ways of work which we think can be more productive and constructive and engaging for people. And I think that, a belief that you can predict the future has made people feel, I can't do something new if I'm not absolutely certain it'll work. But the only things we're certain about it are old things, right? So you can't have innovation without having some experimentation. And I think our addiction to prediction has really constrained our appetite and talent for experiments. But I write a lot about experiments which have really uncovered phenomenal new ways of working that are more constructive, more effective, and more empowering for people. I'm a big fan of scenario planning, which I think is a very creative exercise that uses a much broader diversity of talents and attitudes and expertise in an organization, and also develops organizational critical thinking, which I think is fundamental. And of course, I also wrote about the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, which was, bear in mind, I started researching my book in 2016, an organization formed in 2017 when a number of researchers became alarmed by the degree to which governments had stopped preparing for epidemics and thought, well, somebody's got to. And what they did, I think, has been so impressive, and also, dare I say it, very low profile, which is they started from an understanding that epidemics are always with us, but they are absolutely unpredictable because every single one is different. So we know there will be epidemics in the future, but we don't know what the pathogen will be, where they'll start out, where the outbreak will start, or when it will occur. And so they were saying, okay, so we don't know all those things. When an epidemic starts, what will we wish we had been doing now? Which I think is one of those great questions. It's like, if you know there's going to be an economic crash, because there always are economic crashes, when one happens, what will we wish we had been doing now? And scenario planning speaks to that quite a lot. But at the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, otherwise known as CEPI, part of what they started doing was saying, okay, we know in this kind of environment, we know we're going to want vaccines. So let's start working on those now. They provided the seed financing for Moderna's vaccine.
Really?
We know that you're going to need really interconnected relationships of trust between healthcare professionals all over the world. Or as Richard Hatchett, the director of CEPI, says, you don't want to be exchanging business cards in a crisis. So let's build those relationships now before we need them. We know we're going to need manufacturing capabilities and that negotiating those is a long and arduous process. So let's do that. Let's start educating financial institutions about liberating large amounts of capital, which we know we're going to need ahead of time. And so although, as I say, CEPI's kept quite a low profile, the fact that we've been able to do much of what we've done is because actually we didn't begin from a standing start. And I think for many, many organizations, it's absolutely critical to think about what are the big threats with big impact and some likelihood, which you could be preparing for now to make your organization more robust. And in particular, what I think is interesting is that since the pandemic began, a lot of financial analysts have been asking exactly this same question and saying, why in the financial representation of a corporation do we not ask these questions? Because if you want to know, is this a good investment? You don't just want to know about what they've done in the past. You want to know how prepared are they for sudden shocks and surprises. Mm-hmm. So I think asking better questions about what is the capability we have now to imagine the future, to identify potential threats, and to arm ourselves against them is now an absolutely crucial part of leadership.
Definitely. I wish I would have asked myself those questions.
Yeah. And I think, it's, it sounds a little abstract, but I remember, 2 years after the financial crash, when a lot of people were saying there's going to be another one, having a serious conversation, my husband saying, okay, we don't know if another crash is coming along or not, but let's imagine that one does. What will we wish we had been doing right now? And there were a couple things that, weren't particularly high risk, but they just made us feel safer. So we did them anyway. And I think, because so much 20th century management, which is what is in the heads of all leaders today, is around planning and efficiency. This idea that you have to do things just in case is very alien. And we've become addicted to the idea that no, with enough data, we can plan everything minutely, split second. Everything can be super efficient. But in an age of uncertainty, efficiency erodes all your margins to respond. You saw this in the NHS, right? We had 88.8% bed capacity in the NHS, which is super efficient until something happens. We had 84,000 full-time vacant job positions, which in a way looks like, well, you're saving a ton of money. But something surprising comes along. It doesn't look so smart. Our obsession with efficiency is the hallmark of great management, does not survive the increase in uncertainty, which we've seen growing over the last 30 years.
How do we start to change this mindset in organizations then? Because it's very much kind of baked into the culture of the organization.
You're absolutely right. It is really baked in, and it makes creative, smart people very timorous. We talk about leadership, but very few leaders lead. Mm-hmm. They wait until they see often what everybody else is doing, and then they follow. They wait until they have total certainty. And that isn't real leadership, right? When we talk about leadership, which of course, when I started my career, nobody talked about leaders. They talked about bosses, right? But if we're serious that there is such a thing as leadership, and that we really do want to cultivate leaders, that is people who are out front, then we have to build up a lot more imagination, courage, creativity in what we expect of people in leadership positions. And I think that is a real sea change. And I see some organizations, for example, in the pandemic, some, quickly move to work from home and then sort of heave a sigh of relief. Okay, now everything can kind of go back to the way it was. And others thought, no, hang on a second. Now everything's sort of up in the air. Let's get ahead of this. Let's actually reconfigure ourselves so that we're much more future facing. And the difference between these two kinds of organizations is really striking, because I think the first that merely adjusted location fundamentally.
Yeah, where work is done.
Yeah, I think they're slightly nostalgic. They want everybody to go back to the office as soon as possible. They've become obsessed with surveillance. Oh my God, if I can't see people working, are they working? And they haven't really learned anything. Whereas this second group, that thought, okay, this is what uncertainty feels like. We're in it now. We've talked about it forever. Now we're in it. Let us make the most of it. Let us really seize the opportunity and turn ourselves into an organization that's much more flexible, adaptable. And part of what those organizations have understood is that when they were forced to trust people, for decisions to be made much more on a local basis, what they discovered was, wow, our company kept going, largely because frontline people kept going. This is really brilliant. This shows us when we trust them, they trust us, and we move better and faster, and we're much more in tune. Let's keep that going. Let's not go back. Let's really learn from this. And I think the organizations that have dug deep to understand all the changes that have taken place, instead of just hankered for a return, I think those will come out of this experience much more stronger, getting a much more creative contribution from their people, with higher levels of trust for sure, and a real sense of not being daunted by the future, but being prepared for it.
One thing I wanted to touch on as well is, and you talk about this as well, is the importance of the diversity of thought. I know I certainly wouldn't have got through this as a business without the diversity of thought in my own organization and
Right.
what everyone's brought to the table. I know that's something you're very passionate about.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, we've been talking about diversity forever, or as long as I can remember. And I'm very struck that so many organizations still think it's about political correctness. They still think it's just something we kind of have to do. They haven't won the argument that this is a net gain for the organization. And they haven't really convinced organizations that this is how the whole company gets smarter. And I guess I think about this from two perspectives. One is that I think if you want an organization that's really in tune with its market, it needs to look like its market, because then you don't have to rely on market research to tell you what's going on out there, because what's going on out there is going on in here. And so it's much, so the whole company becomes a kind of super sensor of what's happening. So it develops its own expertise and instinct for its customers and clients. So I think that's one big advantage. But I think the other thing is, the whole premise of organizational life is groups of people are smarter working together than individuals working alone. But that's only true to the degree that they're a really diverse bunch of people. If there are 6 people who are exactly like me and think like me with my sort of educational background, then you can get rid of 5 of them, frankly. There's just no point. Yeah. And so I think that, this capacity that diversity has to inject depth and reality to decision-making, I think is still, in most organizations, a really untapped asset. And I think very few leaders know how to use it well enough. And they talk about empowerment. Empowerment suggests that I'm giving you power. But you're a smart individual. You already have power in your head. The question is, am I creating an environment in which you feel it's really wanted? That I really want to hear your ideas, and that if your ideas are divergent from mine, you're not going to be penalized or thought of as a troublemaker. And I think this capacity of any boss truly to get out of their workforce or their teams the full range of their knowledge and expertise and imagination is something we've still only scratched the surface of. Mm-hmm. And you can see this, in various examples where questions, hard problems are given to very large numbers of people, how many more answers there are and options and solutions than when a couple of senior execs, retire for a strategic retreat for a day or two. So there's just great untapped richness in the heads of most of the people we employ, to take it out of the abstract. I remember once when I was running my first tech company in the States, and we were supposed to be doing a restructuring, because we'd got big and the structures were all a bit of a mess. And I was stuck on the West Coast because of weather problems and couldn't get back for this meeting. And I tried to do it on the phone, and that was kind of clunky. So I just left my team to it. And the stuff they came up with, honestly, I have to say, it was much better than anything in my head. And it taught me a really great lesson, which is sometimes the best thing you can do as a boss is call a meeting and don't turn up, so that everybody who needs to be there is free to think out loud without worrying about, is this what the boss wants to hear?
You're so right. So right. I've seen it happen with my own team on many occasions.
Yeah.
But it does take making sure that you create that psychological safety and that environment for people to do that. Because I've worked in companies where I've even had bosses come to me and say, you never go and speak to the CEO about an idea about coming to me first. And I left the previous company for that exact reason.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm trying to elevate everyone. I'm trying to help. And this is not about you or me or level. And it went horribly wrong. And that kind of scarred me for a while. So anytime I had ideas or perspective, I just kept it to myself. It was like, the last time I did that, not only was I shot down, but in that fashion. So I kind of made a conscious effort when I started this company, that I made it known that you don't have to agree with me, and that's okay. In fact, I want you to disagree with me, so we can constantly challenge each other. And the best innovations and product ideas that have come out of this business haven't come from me; they've come from the team.
Of course.
And I can see the surprise actually when we kind of hire people. They're initially quite surprised how open it is.
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute, the new guy is challenging the CEO.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay. And I can see it starts to kind of build. So it's super important. Does that also link, because something I also wrote down, does that also link with the social component for resilience?
Yeah, it is. But I think, just coming back to what you said, which I think is so important, is that people believed it when they saw it. Because you can say until you're blue in the face, I will never shoot the messenger, but it's only when people see it live in action, they think, oh, right, this is different, right? So I think that's so important. Now, the social component is really important in the sense that the longer teams work together and the better they know each other, the much more open with each other they'll be, which, especially when it comes to things like innovation, really accelerates innovation, which is to the degree that you and I know each other, we can swap ideas, and, we're not particularly worried about stepping on each other's toes because we know we're on the same side. And exactly. I'm a bit nerdy, and I know that you're a little, I don't know, faster or slower or more romantic or less romantic. But we also know that what makes the work great isn't you or me, it's the combination. And so we will put up with a lot from each other because we know that collectively we can just do much better work that we can be, both of us, be more proud of. And I think, that's really what my book, A Bigger Prize, is about. And there's a TED talk I did, which is about the pecking orders at work and, how counterproductive those are. And I think also that, when I came to work on Uncharted, one of the things that really surprised me is I interviewed a number of business leaders who were running organizations during moments of extreme crisis. So these were existential crises when the organization just about failed. And they were very interesting, very open conversations. at some point, every single one of the people I interviewed wept, just because remembering it was very emotional for them. And so I had to ask them, if this was years ago and it's still so emotional, that now, how then did you keep going? And every single one of them said the same thing, which was, it was my friends and colleagues that kept me going. And one of them added a little bitterly, it's the opposite of the gig economy. Longevity really counts. When you've been through the trenches with your colleagues, then you watch each other's backs, you look after each other. When you can, when I can see that you're fried, or you can see that I'm really at the end of my tether, we look after each other. And that is what keeps organizations going in moments of crisis. And it does really concern me, again, that this sort of obsession with efficiency. How many people can we remove? How can we shave our margins? Actually, what it's doing is it's taking all the resilience out of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Because if people don't care about each other, when the chips are down, what do they care about? People aren't loyal to companies, they're loyal to each other. Companies don't have ideas, only the people in them do. And so the quality of relationship between people is a fundamental asset that can be nurtured, or it can be destroyed.
Wow. Yeah. And I have seen one thing I am quite optimistic about is how this, the last kind of 8-9 months have brought people closer together more now than ever. I've kind of seen people rally, both in my own organization, behind each other. We've kind of connected and bonded and support each other in a way that we have never before.
Yeah.
Because we're all in this together. So there's it's kind of, everyone keeps using the word the great equalizer. It pretty much is. But you are right.
Well, I do kind of wonder, because it's equalizing among all those people who have offices to work in and gardens to walk in, not so
That's
much
true.
the people who were stuck working out of their bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think the pandemic has been a radically different experience for different kinds of people. And in general, I think a large number of companies have been quite sensitive to that. I know a lot of companies that have checked, do you have a decent chair to sit in if you're going to be sitting at your desk all day long, or on your bed all day long, for that matter. But I'm also very struck from the companies I've worked with and that friends of mine have been researching. Everybody's very tired.
Yes.
The leadership teams are absolutely fried. And everyone's tired, not just because they've been working really long hours. Yeah, it's great, no commuting time, but that's more hours of work, right? But there's this background noise of anxiety, right? Most people I know somebody who's died of COVID. I have 6 friends of mine who have died this year. This is very real to most people, and it's exhausting being scared. So I do worry that, as with the vaccine, we start to return to something vaguely familiar. The assumption will be made that, hey, everybody's fine, when everybody isn't fine. And I think there are 2 things that come out of that. One is we really have to be prepared to cut each other some slack. That when I'm a bit ratty one day, which I have been known to be, or somebody who's ratty to me, or a bit, I don't know, careless, or makes mistake, whatever, we definitely have to cut them some slack. But I think we also have to be more thoughtful about actually how well are we, and how well are our colleagues, and is there something we can do to help? Because the assumption that everybody's experience of the pandemic has been like mine is probably wrong.
Yeah, we've seen that. I've had, I noticed that for every single one of my employees is a unique experience. Some are at home on their own, and are completely isolated from their support structures. They have no support structure.
Right.
Like myself and my wife are struggling with our 2-year-old running around causing chaos.
Yeah.
At the same time, everyone's in a different situation. So we kind of had to fully tailor everything around everyone's experience, which has been.
And it's interesting because in the very early days of the lockdown in March, I very rashly said to my neighbor, who's a farmer and runs a farm shop, and was bewailing the fact that he couldn't do deliveries. I very rashly said, "Oh, I'll do deliveries for you." And, the upshot of that is I ended up all through lockdown running a team of 10 drivers who were absolutely brilliant. I mean, they were just wonderful people. We were all volunteers doing it because we wanted to keep the shop alive. We wanted to keep the farm alive. But, the experience of delivering to the houses of people all over Somerset, was an eye-opener. I mean, I remember one which just said, please just ring the bell and leave the shopping on the doorstep because we have a fragile cancer sufferer and we're just really afraid of infection. And you think, oh my God, these poor people, as if the pandemic weren't bad enough. Yeah. And he delivered to some very fancy homes and some very, clearly stressed homes, one with a dad who was clearly going out of his mind and 2 kids at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, still in their PJs, and you just thought, whoa, this is hard in all kinds of ways that I would not have imagined. And I wouldn't see if I weren't doing this. Mm-hmm. And, those memories are part of those kids' upbringing. And so I think we just have to be really humble when it comes to thinking we really know what people have been through.
Yeah, you're very right. Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. I really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, where can they kind of learn more about your work? So grab a copy of your book, connect with you. Where's the best place for them to find you?
So everything can be found on my website, all the books and a contact and all that sort of stuff. And that's just www.mheffernan.com. And if you Google me, you'll find me very, very, very easily, since there aren't, as it turns out, all that many Margaret Heffernans in the world.
Yeah, I'll make sure for everyone listening, I'll link a link to the website in the comments section, as well as links to your TED Talks and a few of my favorites as well. But thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, and I appreciate everything, and hopefully get to see you in person soon.
I hope so. And in the meantime, have fun with that 2-year-old.
Yeah. Well, now
try to stay sane.
Yeah, we're back into lockdown again, so it's going to be fun. But at least it's Christmas, so there's something to be positive about. But look, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks a lot, Chris. Cheers. Bye.